Ladies and gentlemen, like December 7th, 1941, and September 11th, 2001, October 7th is a day that will forever live in infamy. It was the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah. It began as a perfect day, not a cloud in the sky. Thousands of young Israelis were celebrating at an outdoor music festival. And suddenly, at 6:29 a.m., as children were still sleeping soundly in their beds in the towns and kibbutzim next to Gaza, suddenly heaven turned into hell. 3,000 Hamas terrorists stormed into Israel. They butchered 1,200 people from 41 countries, including 39 Americans. These monsters, they raped women, they beheaded men, they burned babies alive, they killed parents in front of their children, and children in front of their parents. They dragged 255 people, both living and dead, into the dark dungeons of Gaza. And I pledge to you and to all the bereaved families of Israel, no matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult the road ahead, Israel will not relent, Israel will not bend. We will defend our land, we will defend our people, we will fight until we achieve victory. Victory of liberty over tyranny, victory of life over death, victory of good over evil. The sacrifice of your loved ones will not be in vain. Because for Israel, never again must never be an empty promise. It must always remain a sacred vow. And after October 7th, never again is now.
Well, welcome to the 700 Club. On this day, 1 year ago, Israelis woke to the sound of sirens. Iranian-backed terrorists from Gaza were attacking Israeli communities. They killed more than 1,100 people, and they took more than 250 hostages. It was the worst massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust.
Now Israel is in a multi-front war, not only against Iran's proxy armies, but against Iran itself. As the fighting continues, the nation is remembering the victims of October 7th. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl reports.
At 6:29 Monday morning, the moment terrorists from Gaza breached the fence into Israel 1 year ago, President Isaac Herzog observed a moment of silence at the site of the Nova Music Festival, where hundreds gathered in memory of those killed and kidnapped.
7th of October 2023, a day that should be remembered in infamy. This is a scar on humanity. This is a scar on the face of the earth.
It's one of many observances happening throughout the country to remember the October 7th attacks, including an event by the government press office, the National Documentation Project, which is collecting stories of those who suffered that day.
All of mankind, we have to remember what has happened on October 7th. We have to remember the atrocities. We have to remember the people who are still being held hostage in Gaza.
On hand were family members of the murdered, as well as relatives of the hostages still held, and some who've been released.
Each story is unique, but together they create the full picture of captivity, a sad picture.
Shai Zohar is the uncle of Omer Nutra, a dual Israeli-American citizen and tank commander who was kidnapped as he responded to the attacks.
Omer was taken alive out of that burning tank that you've seen on the morning of October 7th. Ever since, we have not heard a thing about Omer.
Zohar is leading a Jewish prayer effort in Tel Aviv, crying out for the return of the hostages.
The world needs to make a unified stand against Hamas and saying they need to come back. Period. It's been a year, and whatever it is that needs to be dealt with will be dealt with after the hostages release.
This weekend, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel is fighting a war on 7 fronts against the enemies of civilization, including Iran, which launched more than 200 ballistic missiles at Israel last week. He criticized France's president and others who want to block the sale of weapons to Israel.
President Macron and some other Western leaders are now calling for an arms embargo against Israel. Shame on them.
Meanwhile, Hezbollah continues to fire rockets at Israel as the IDF carries out surgical strikes in Beirut. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, let us remember 39 Americans were killed a year ago. This is our part of this struggle. And there are American hostages still in tunnels in Gaza. It's incredible to me that you could see protests on American college campuses supporting their capture, supporting Hamas. It makes no sense to me that any government would support, any political group would support what Hamas did. And when you turn to Lebanon and what Hezbollah is doing, where they're firing rockets at civilian targets, it makes no sense that the world isn't standing with Israel to say, never again. We all vowed after the Holocaust, we would never see this again. And here it is. Now is our generation's turn, and we need to stand against anti-Semitism. We need to stand for Israel. 100 years ago, it was established in international law by the League of Nations that Israel, the Jewish people, had a right of self-determination in their ancestral homeland. That's why it was called the British Mandate. That came into being in 1948. The UN recognized the state of Israel. The only people who didn't were the Arab nations surrounding her. They declared war. Now, over the decades since that, Egypt has come to peace with Israel. Jordan has come to peace with Israel. The entire region needs to come to peace with Israel and say, yes, indeed, international law is correct. You do have the right of self-determination. You do have a right to live in your ancestral homeland of Israel. Let us forever stand with Israel. CBN News will live stream the National Remembrance Ceremony from Israel. That's today, live, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch it on the CBN News YouTube channel or on the CBN News app. We want to remember, and you can be a part of that at 1 p.m. today.